So welcome everyone. So glad you joined us this afternoon for our first ever Stakeholder Integration Virtual Conference. If you're just joining us, we had a great session earlier and we look forward to our next session with Tiffany Johnson from Victoria College, and she's going to be talking about working with vocational rehab and workforce boards. And my name is Olga Escamilla. I am your host and moderator, and we also have Anne-Marie Molinari, and she will be one of our hosts and moderators for this session. So I'm going to go through some virtual housekeeping slides for our presentation today. So be sure that you're connected to audio, and there's a couple ways to do that, and I noticed that everyone is pretty much connected, so I won't go through the instructions, but if you ever have any issues, we do post the instructions in the chat pod. So webinar best practices, be sure to mute your phones at all times. We'd like for you to type your questions in the chat pod or raise your virtual hand. So we're going to have some stopping points throughout the presentation. So if you do have questions, please do type them in the chat pod, and when we get to the question slide, we will entertain your questions at that time. So remember, again, and I'll go over that in another slide, to select everyone when you are sending to in the chat pod. So send to everyone. In order to obtain a PD certificate for attendance, you must have audio, so it's a requirement that you have audio for the session. So if you're sitting next to someone or someone is sitting next to you, then please let me know so that we could give them attendance credit. And you will be able to download and print your certificate of completion via your transcripts in the AEL PD portal. Again, to expand your view, so if you're in the presentation and you want to expand your view, be sure to use your diagonal arrows on the right-hand side of your screen. That'll make your screen full screen so that you could see the presentation better. So again, respond to everyone in the chat pod. You have your participant list and your chat pod screen. So if you'll notice that they're both blue, if you look down at the chat box, it says send to, and make sure you change that to everyone so that everyone can see your responses or your questions, because we really want to have some interactive sharing for our presenter, and we want to have some good questions for her. So speaking of our presenter, I'm very proud to introduce Tiffany Johnson. And Tiffany Johnson is the Director of Adult Education at Victoria College. She has over 18 years of experience in adult education, and her experience ranges from teaching from beginning literacy, college prep, across every type of classroom, including the correctional setting. And she often jokes that they let her out to come and be the director of AEL from the correctional facility. She's done distance learning and traditional face-to-face training. She serves as the president-elect of TALI, and she serves as the presiding officer of the AEL State Advisory Committee. So welcome, Tiffany. And if anyone has any questions, please type them in the send to box. Change that to everyone. And if there are no questions about the housekeeping, I'm going to go ahead and transfer the presentation to Tiffany so that she may begin. Welcome, Tiffany.
Great. Thanks, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. What a promotional bio. By the way, that picture was just a few years old, so never hurts to use one of those. I want to thank you guys for joining us. I see a lot of friends and fellow colleagues out there that are attending. And I think it's very exciting to be part of the first virtual stakeholder webinar series. So those of you that do not know me, my name is Tiffany Johnson, and today I'm going to be happy to share information on the integration of our AEL program with both our local vocational rehabilitation center and our local workforce board. There's also a lot of different activities and projects that we can bring up and discuss today, and just focus on that valuable partnership with our Workforce Solutions offices as well. So I want to give you a little bit of an overview of our area. so that everyone can see exactly where is Victoria. We often get that question. Our workforce board area, the Golden Crescent, is nestled right in the center of several large board areas. And we're just in the curve of Texas, and we're the smallest of all 28 board areas. Being only 7 counties carries both its pros and its cons, though. We have very limited resources in small communities. We have very small amounts of funding, and we also have quite a unique little blend of our demand. We serve a coastal region that's packed with large petrochemical plants and manufacturing, and just across the board area, we serve rural districts where mushrooms and beer are the #1 industries. We have a county where there is a high level of education that hosts both a community college and a university, but we also have a county where a degree is not needed, but more skilled trade and craftsmanship is required to earn just a livable wage. One other characteristic that some of you may relate to in the Golden Crescent is that we have a very changing and dynamic workforce population. From the gas and oil boom that we had 10 years ago that drove our wages, including minimum wage at places like McDonald's and Dairy Queen, up to over $30 to $50 an hour. Those jobs are non-credentialed, and basically we have the same situation now with the high salaries demanding construction, sheetrock, carpentry, and even roofing in our local area due to the hurricane recovery efforts. So our adult education program, whose mission is to meet the workforce demand and be able to provide for the economic growth in our region, has to be aware of both the changing needs, but also be quick to respond to those changing needs, depending on what's going on in your individual areas. Even most of the time you want to be even further ahead and be ahead of those projections just to be able to meet the needs in specific areas. And it's for all these reasons that one of my passions is to promote and help share different strategies that we can collaborate in our regions that'll partner with not only AEL and Workforce and VR, but also your community resources to be able to coordinate and integrate in the best way to maximize your resources that you can provide for your students. So I'd like to take a minute and conduct a little activity by having an interactive little lesson with collaboration. So on your desktop, or if you'd rather use your phone, I'd like you to go to menti.com. It's www.menti.com. And it's a new interactive tool. It's my latest and greatest that I'm totally in love with because it doesn't use texting, so I do not have to give the data package rates may apply. It's just a website. And on that website, all you should see is a question once you enter the code that's posted. And if you can see the screen, you should see the code is 393989. And once you get there, you can start adding some words about how you feel your current collaboration efforts are. And I believe you can probably see the screen if I have the correct sharing screen on. Coming in. So we're looking at words and phrases that talk about the beginning and just getting started and just starting those talks. Weak, lacking. And it seems like, and that's probably why you guys joined the webinar this afternoon, that there is a little room for improvement a way to expand, and I'm hoping that by the end of our session today, you might not have all the answers, but at least you'll be able to walk away with a firm background and maybe some new ideas that you can take back to your programs and share with the leadership. Okay, great. And we'll come back to this resource to actually answer another question at the end. Big room for improvement. Okay, so that's exactly where we are headed. Today we're going to talk about the goals for the session are just to identify ways to build trust between agencies. I know that's a huge factor. When we first began our partnerships, things were very tense, not quite sure what's going on. Can we trust them with our students? We also want to talk about specific projects because I'm here to share exact projects that you can take back to your own regions. We want to see some examples. I'll be happy to share all the examples of things we do in our program and in our Golden Crescent region. How to focus on ongoing plans. A lot of times you can start a project or you can get together and have an event or work on one specific area, and after it's all over, it just kind of fizzles out. And then also being a good team player. So let's talk about building trust first. One of the first steps that you must take whenever you're working with any new partnership is to identify and recognize who your key players are in your community and do your homework. Because if you don't know what partners can provide and how their requirements or their limitations work, then the relationship can be off to a rough start and cause frustration for everyone involved. The VR, the Vocational Rehabilitation Center, and the Workforce Solutions offices in your region usually will hold multiple contracts or grants that all have specific entry requirements, have accountability measures for each population they serve, and they have a whole vocabulary using their own world of acronyms. Going into a collaboration effort or a collaborative partnership doesn't require that you be an expert in their jobs. As a matter of fact, that's probably not a good idea, but it does take some background and some preparation before you set up meetings with another agency. Some hints or some ways that you can actually do a little preparation before meeting with your partners. Ask the leadership from some of your local offices for a training for them to come and share general information just for you and your staff. You can arrange a job shadowing day and take a couple of your frontline staff or even yourself to be able to job shadow at another agency, and this works for both Workforce Solutions offices as well as the Vocational Rehabilitation offices in your community. And most definitely you can share back and forth and invite them over to do some job shadowing in your area. Definitely review online state information on the TWC website. There's a whole wealth of information on their website about what specific services are that they can provide, giving you a list of offices, talking about entry requirements, and be able to review acronyms and project names for the different agencies just to stay on top of keeping up with jargon. If you've ever worked with any other agencies outside of adult education, and usually when you have a conversation where you're using so many acronyms, someone in the room that maybe is not as familiar will say, wait a minute, you're speaking in different languages. So it's always good that they understand when you're in a meeting and they're using that jargon that you've actually brushed up before you got there. I remember the discussion I had one of my first meetings at the workforce office, and I heard the phrase ABOD. And I thought, what's an ABOD? And of course, I didn't ask until the end, and I will ask, but I had no idea what the phrase was or where it came from, and it was very good to get a hold of a sheet of acronyms. And I will be happy to share that with you if someone at Train PD doesn't already have one that's ready and willing. I'm sure there will be one. Um, Create a little cheat sheet maybe if you're reviewing and you haven't taken that step for a collaboration yet. Take a little time to sit down and make a little cheat sheet. Some of the services apply directly and very strategic to our population, and some, although you may be familiar with them, are usually not something you're going to engage in a daily in your daily work. Another area in order to help build that trust is to provide information about the services that we can provide, but also don't overwhelm your partners with all of your services and expect them to remember every single criteria for every single adult ed program. Just identify a couple of areas where your population may overlap and focus on introducing those first. You could, just a few examples, discuss the potential for providing academic support, maybe for your workforce or your VR partners that are seeking to enter a training program. You can invite the VR staff over to discuss accessibility arrangements that could be provided in some of your ABE or your ESL classes. You can highlight some special services in your area, possibly strategically looking at probation or parole populations. And you can discuss some of the special classes that could be provided by adult education and literacy to meet specific needs of the VR or the workforce clients. Those could include digital literacy, financial literacy, or even a short employability skills class. And finally, set up your meetings with leadership to share the big picture of collaboration and make it clear to them that you are not asking for any funds. You're not asking for staffing. Your goal is only to align with the existing resources and coordinate with their existing processes. You're not redesigning, you're not replacing their efforts, and you're not trying to reinvent anything. You're just trying to work together with them. So these were different examples of maybe how you can start building the trust with your collaborative partners. So I'm going to give you guys a chance if you'd like to throw out any questions about any of the ideas that we shared so far. Move on to some specific projects. So we've looked at some ways to get started and to highlight some specific projects after you're familiar with the different services that could be provided and you've met with the leadership from both agencies or even have one tri-agency meeting, just to ensure that you're all serving the same population and you're working towards integrating resources. One of the best projects that we started with was to hold an integration event. We hosted several of these already, and they've actually become, usually we'll do one in the fall and we'll do one in the spring. We hosted one event that brought together all the staff and the leadership from all three agencies. That would be vocational rehabilitation, the adult ed provider, and workforce solutions. But also that with the adult ed provider, if you're not housed at a community college, you definitely want to bring in your higher ed partners as well. And when we hosted, we did host the first integration event here at our center we all shared together, and we kind of created a sharing system. But in subsequent integration events, we've brought in outside trainers, and your PD coordinator can contact TCAL for a training to actually host on your site to help develop those strategic partnerships and to look at coordinating those services. The training that can be held includes the development of action plans and identifying region-specific tasks that can be used to help get the ball rolling. But there's also several key trust-building exercises in with those integration events. Another specific project that we've held is that Workforce Solutions in VR have quarterly trainings for their staff in our region. So we've asked if we could come in and share a few minutes, just a few facts about adult education to make sure everyone's heard of us or at least knows where to get information about enrolling students and the services that can be provided. We've also had adult education staff visit each of the smaller branches that are in our rural communities. In Victoria, we have staff attend all the quarterly meetings for both vocational rehab and our workforce partners, as well as the TANF outreach sessions that are held monthly. Sometimes they participate by sharing adult ed information, maybe some classes that we have coming up, maybe some special projects, maybe some areas of enrollment that are low for our program and we want to bolster. Sometimes they go just to observe to see what new information is being shared with their staff. And sometimes they're there just to answer some general questions about high school equivalency, share information about changes that may be coming, and talk about some of the short-term training programs. And sometimes they're actually there and asked to help step up because it's a little overwhelming sometimes with the massive amount of people that sometimes show up. They can't predict. So it could just be passing out papers and showing that you're working together and you're okay to be there to help out with their needs as well. Another specific project that we've reached out and collaborated on is to develop special response teams. And in our local workforce board area, we have been invited to join the rapid response team that goes out when companies are anticipating large layoffs. We had this happen in one of our, a couple of our rural sites right after the oil and gas boom. And we had several of the companies either struggling to meet their demands because they lost a lot of employees to the oil field, or the opposite, they were in an oil field company and then had to lay off after the boom fell. So we were able to go with that rapid response team to meet with the participants or the clients who had just been laid off. Now, just so you know, this isn't exactly a recruitment for long-term adult ed students. We were there only to offer support. We were there to share a little information, maybe a short-term employability class. The rapid response team that goes out first usually has to deal with their clients that are looking for, how am I going to pay the rent? How am I going to get back in the workforce? How am I going to be able to get things turned around? They're not there to enroll in a 2-year college program looking to increase their skills necessarily. So there is a little finesse that has to come along when serving on those special teams and trying to target specific groups. And it was very, very different when we went out with the groups and we had a nice little talk about what we were going to promote and what we wouldn't promote while we were out there on their teams. And we were very fortunate. We have a short truck driving program that was very well received by some of the people that were laid off, and so we were able to recruit and enroll and turn them back out to a job in our area very quickly. And they turned out to be great promoters of both the adult education courses as well as the help that they receive from the workforce. Okay, so any questions about specific projects, or if you'd like me to elaborate on any of them?
Tiffany, you mentioned the stakeholder integration events and how they could be provided by Train PD, but tell me a little bit about how those stakeholder integration events were received by the various programs that were there. Just a little bit more information about that. How did those go?
Well, the first one was definitely more uncomfortable than the last one. So we had a leadership meeting. So there's a team that meets as far as that goes with the executive director of the workforce board area, along with our lead contractor and our district manager for the vocational rehab, and then myself. So at the leadership level, when you're putting together an event like that, you have these visions and you have these goals set, but when it comes down to your frontline staff, the first meeting was a little awkward. They actually were there. It's, oh, we got to go to training. I could be in the office. A typical way a professional development event may be perceived. But we had this event and we brought all our staff, and it started with leadership being convinced that it needed to be done. So once we got over that hurdle and we brought everyone together, we held several different, not necessarily icebreakers. We knew each other. My career navigators knew the case managers at the workforce board, just not past that front initial email back and forth or phone calls. So we brought in some specific activities that forced them to work together as teams. We brought in a little competition. One of the first interactive events that we had, we brought in an acronym sheet, and we made sure that the tables were divided so there was a fair amount. Everyone was distributed across the agencies, so there were mixed groups. And then we had them work on an acronym sheet that included acronyms from all three agencies. And we held a competition, and first one got a prize. And so it kind of brought in that feeling of, I can't do this, we have to work as a team, because one person usually did not know all the answers. So once you broke down those walls, leadership was happy to start seeing the teams work together. The teams were happier because they got to know someone outside of the office. But the best part of the integration event was one of the ends of our first meeting were the action plans. And I think I'm going to share a little more later in the presentation about specific examples of those. But the action plans that specifically said, we want to do this, this is when we want to do it, and this is how we see this working. And I think it was a big step for all the leadership to be able to invite every employee that was there to give their feedback about what they would see as a successful collaborative effort. It wasn't a decision that was made higher up by leadership and dictated down, which sometimes happens. You will collaborate or you will work with these people. It was more of a grassroots effort that started from the field. So, and I'll share a little bit, again, a specific project about the teams that were built and the support they receive that came out of it that shows that there was a positive perception later. Fast forward to today, which is 2 years later, after our first events, and we have a very good working relationship now. I think it's great whenever I don't get to field the questions now. My staff know exactly who at the workforce office to go to. They know exactly who on my team to go to. So there's that that ease of communication across the agencies that makes things work in a more efficient way. And I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Yes, thank you so much.
Okay. And let me move right on into examples, more specific examples of collaboration, because these plans for ensuring your communication and connections are being encouraged, and that's great. But I'm sure you guys are here this afternoon to see specific examples. And I think the best example that came out of any of our collaboration efforts with the agencies has to do with one shared referral form. And that one form is pretty much essential in preventing your student, your client, your customer, whatever agency name they're going to have, it's preventing them from having to move from agency to agency, and instead the form moves, or you're able to communicate what services are needed behind the scenes, so your students don't see that. Another challenge with us is arranging transportation. Our workforce solutions office is downtown. Our community college is more in the center, and our vocational rehabilitation office is in another corner of the city. So having to arrange a bus or a transit or any other method of transportation in our area for the students is usually quite a barrier. Not just transportation, but a student having to go and learn a whole new enrollment process. In this office, you start here. In this office, you have to sign in, and it's just kind of confusing for them. And putting that on them just gives them one more task they have to do. We talk a lot about PII and keeping information confidential, but yet having a student give the information here and there and over there just to receive their services can be frustrating for them. Plus, it's not exactly a good practice. They also very easily, if one of the systems is not the way it's supposed to be, something does happen amiss, it's real quick for our population to lose faith and motivation in these systems that we've created to help them overcome barriers. So a simple list of basic services for each agency can be easily created and emailed between agencies. Of course, you have to follow all the student permission to release, but just to see how this works, I want to give you a couple of concrete examples, as well as I'm going to share my screen again, I think. Hang on. And I want to show you an exact example of our form that we use. Okay, I think everyone can see it. So it's very simple, very simplistic, and sometimes that may be the best solution. A perfect example: during initial advising, an adult education student is meeting with their career navigator, and they start discussing that they're interested in being a nurse. Their scores are pretty high, but they're having trouble paying for the GED test. They're age 18. So adult education can enroll them in a high school equivalency class, but also complete a referral on them so that Workforce can step in and review them for maybe an out-of-school youth program. That way the case manager and the career navigator can work together to share TABE scores. That can prevent the Workforce office from double testing, and Workforce has funds available to pay the GED fee, as where adult ed cannot. So we're already on our way to coordinating services that can benefit both agencies, but most importantly, the student got those services offered and started that enrollment process without ever going to another agency. Another example that I pulled from our caseload this year is during an intake at vocational rehab, a client disclosed that they wanted to go to the nurse aid class. And they had graduated from high school, but they were still struggling academically, and they didn't have very good study skills. A referral can come in straight through the vocational rehab. An adult ed can include that client in one of our IET programs that provides the academic support, and the career navigator who's working with that referral can include them on the next student success skills class that we have, or even offer additional resources through our tutoring center. In addition, with one referral and having a team that reviews those referrals, a Workforce Solutions case manager may be able to jump in and identify some supportive services that could assist, such as bus tickets for our local bus transit, or maybe some funds for some nursing equipment. They can pay for scrubs and watches depending on the program that we're going into. Just remember that each of your workforce board areas is different with what programs and what supports they can offer. But again, if you have a Workforce Solutions case manager who's able to review the facts and get additional information when needed, they will know what program fits or what could be a good fit immediately just by reviewing the student case file, or even visiting with the case manager, not necessarily needing to bring the student in until they have a clear plan of what's needed. And I'm going to go back to
Tiffany. Thank you for sharing that form.
Sure.
Christina says it's a fantastic form. Are you going to be sharing this in the community to practice?
I'll be happy to.
Thank you.
So another way that we've worked very closely with the Workforce Office and also vocational rehab is to help identify some work-based classes. So your local workforce boards have an entire business services unit that's dedicated to serving employers in your region. And adult ed providers have an enrollment target that includes serving employers. So it seems like a natural fit, but a lot of times we don't know where to start or how to start those meetings. But knowing that you can have a specific person that you meet with at the business services office, they can help possibly give you some guidance on some projects that may be needed in your area. One example of this collaboration is one of our rural sites had a large meat packing plant, and they had contacted our local workforce board office, and they were very frustrated that they had a high turnover rate. And so the business service representative for that company shared the information with the adult ed staff, and we were able to connect directly with the employer and begin an on-site ESL class. That allowed the employees to have an incentive or a perk at their job, and it helped decrease the turnover of the employees at their company. Another example is we worked with a large petrochemical plant, and they had requested some on-site classes to increase skills from our contract training department at the community college, but there's no funds available for the incumbent workers or any training for incumbent workers. So adult education was able to design a professional training series that was able to work with the company, and we recruited in turn a large class of IET students who decided to continue and come back for certifications in welding, HVAC, and electrical. So it was a great win-win for us to have an on-site class. It was also great for those students to be motivated to continue their education after they finished the course that the company taught and provided. And then lastly is strategic recruitment. And this, to me, as a director, is a great way to use all three agencies together because usually we each have our own systems that collect data and information on students. And looking at our goals and our strategic data mining, you can pull a lot of information and share it with your partners. Teams can generate reports of students that are looking for employment who are not currently employed. And those students can be mailed or emailed information about upcoming job fairs, training programs, anything there directly if you share those with your local workforce board. We've implemented, or we include Work in Texas, a registration in our IET classes and in all our prep classes. Once your students are in Work in Texas, they have access to jobs that are in your area and the job requirements. But your local Workforce Solutions office can also share reports and run reports for non-high school completers. And they can also target and reach out to those potential clients to get information about AEL orientation and enrollments. And then some offices have special projects that are specifically focused on corrections, ESL, out-of-school youth, etc. And that can be utilized for sharing flyers or even partnering for specific outreach. Now, the results we talked earlier about with team-generated action plans, specific results came out of our integration events that we were later able to assign to different groups and be able to follow up at designated times. We like to go back and review those quarterly or have the teams review those. And then we've already seen our form, and I'll be happy to send that out in PDF or Word if you'd like to just make some revisions on it, change the names.
Are there any questions at this time for Tiffany? Tiffany, we have about 13 minutes.
Okay.
Tiffany, this is Anne Marie. I had a quick question for you. How many direct referrals do you see from vocational rehabilitation actually sending students to you for adult education help? Has that been very helpful to get referrals that way?
We saw it very slow in the beginning, as well as what we do see more of is the caseworker or the assigned case manager will contact us and ask about joining us for an information session or an orientation session, and they'll bring 2 or 3 of their clients with them. So we've kind of, the form's great, but we kind of start out a little bit more personable, and we've had that happen several times. So they'll call and arrange to kind of bring a group over more than an individual one at a time. So, and the opposite of that is that although we created a great form, we had no intention of tracking it when we first started. So we were just so overwhelmed and excited to actually have one form. That's actually what we started doing just this year, is to actually track and see how many forms we do submit back and forth. And we also are coming back and doing a follow-up to see what actually was the results out of those and how many were co-enrolled in our different programs. So I'll try to keep up with that tracking, but
Thank you.
okay. So and I've touched on these a little bit. We actually, as an ongoing plan and to keep up with everybody's projects, we've developed tri-agency teams that include representatives across all the agencies, but more specifically in those similar roles. So we may have a team that only includes the frontline staff. We may have a team that includes all of your case managers. But more importantly, as leadership, you have to make sure to dedicate some time to give them to work together. It's very frustrating to be put on a team and never given any team time. So quarterly, we do meet as a leadership team, and we try to work out specific days and times that already align with existing trainings and include adult education and the VR and the workforce together during those already training times, if that makes sense. One thing that has been mentioned before is to celebrate together. Don't make everything work and all work, because if you invite each other to other events, celebrate awards, completions, graduations, share your success stories with each other through email, we like on Facebook and we share social media goals. Be aware when goals are met and be happy about those, because it's always difficult to buckle down and start again until you've had a little break. And another thing is to be honest about sharing your struggles, and do that on a regular basis. Our monthly or quarterly time, whenever your leadership can get together, you don't just want to talk about what's going great and what's going well. You actually want to share where we maybe need a little help. Each of the 3 agencies have targets and measures that involve offering education, offering support, and all 3 agencies have very specific, detailed follow-up targets. So if your VR program is having trouble placing a client in a job, maybe you can send out an email to your adult ed students that are working and ask if they know of a position that's open. Maybe your workforce solutions is having trouble locating out-of-school youth. You have a program that you can find time to maybe adjust your work schedule or your time schedule to complement their work schedule. And we've talked quite a bit about specific populations and some new projects, and I'm very open about areas of enrollment that I need help. Hey, we need a few more referrals here, or we're having trouble in this area. Because remember, it is your community that you're all working together for. And I'm going to jump right into the last section here about being a good team member. I think throughout the entire process of working with your fellow agencies, you need to remember to be a good team member. Collaboration and integration is never about just one person or one agency. I think the key is discovering enough about your partners so that you can develop projects and work together to make sure both parties are receiving something that they can benefit from. I think that another key to being a good team is to ensure that the workload's not falling all on one agency. Once there is a little proportional change, maybe this particular agency is overwhelming another one with referrals or activities, you need to revisit that balance and make sure that everyone is contributing and everyone is working together. Be very aware of deadlines or goals and meetings and be very respectful of them. All your partners have busy schedules, so if you start canceling and asking for extensions on things that they asked you to take care of, it's going to look like you're not a vested person in the team. And finally, make sure that your information sharing is very clear, very consistent, and often. Your bad feelings and your trust starts to waver anytime misinformation is shared. And it could just be a simple oversight, but if an update doesn't get through, that's definitely a deterrent, and it can weigh on your relationships. And a good way to keep up is usually a weekly email. Hey, this is what's coming up in Adult Ed next week. A shared drive, perhaps, for electronic files. maybe a monthly shared calendar so that everyone knows where something is happening. And I have one more little close activity that I'd like to actually go through and bring everybody back together and see if I can get some feedback on maybe a project that you liked or maybe something that you can take away from the session and go back and implement that to be able to expand your programs. So I'm going to ask that you go back again, and this time I'm going to give you another question. So if you'll go back to the website that we went to earlier, and here we go. Oh, let me share my screen again. And that will give you an opportunity to be able to list one thing that you will work on to improve your relationships.
If you were on the website earlier, you might need to refresh to change the question, I think.
Good. I see a few scrolling in. And I'll be happy to answer any other questions and be sending the form, the collaboration form, over to Train PD, and we can get that posted in one of the communities of practice. And it sounds like you guys are taking away some great things, and you don't have to steal. I'll be happy to share it. Effective partnerships are key, and in a small area such as ours, you do not have a lot of resources to go around. So one thing you want to do is make sure you can maximize those, but also not duplicate any services in your community. One of the frustrating things is to look like you're competing with other agencies just to serve the same population. So once you all get on the same page with your population you're targeting and how you can work together, it should not be that much of a struggle after that, and you'll all be sharing great ideas that you're having in your own regions. So thank you guys so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you for being willing to share. You want to talk about the photos?
No. Actually, that was probably our third integration event. And we had Anson come down and speak. It was at Christmas, which is why it looks very festive. And it was quite funny because we had probably about 150 staff members from across the college staff, the VR staff, and the workforce staff attend. And I guess Anson seemed kind of a superstar. Everyone was very impressed that the state director would come to Victoria and speak. So it gave a little festive feel to the event. And that was one of our first meetings. And then down on the right-hand corner is the actual next year when we did win a workforce integration award. So it does work when you iron out those struggles in the beginning and start to work together.
Thank you, Tiffany. Great example of stakeholder integration. Thank you so much. Everyone, we'll get started. We're going to leave this session. If there are no other questions, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the other room and get that set up. So don't forget to go get your